Morning everyone, welcome to the Corporate Services and Economic Growth Overview and Scrutiny Committee here Monday 29th of September. We will start with apologies for absence.
I've had apologies from Councillors Lambert, Robinson and Taylor.
Thank you. Anything on the floor? No. We'll move on to item 2, which is minutes of the last meeting. Your agenda has been circulated beforehand. And we agree minutes from the previous meeting, which is 21st of July. Agreed, thank you. Item 3 is disclosure of members' interests. Does anyone have anything that they need to disclose for today's meeting which hasn't been previously disclosed to the council? Okay. Item 4, forward plan of cabinet decisions.
Nothing to add, Chair, but if anyone has any questions.
Any questions? Nope. Okay, item 5 is the financial performance 25-26 position at the end of June 25. This report ensures that the Cabinet were informed of current financial position for Council against the budget 25-26. Councillor Oliver, do you wish to go through that thing?
Thank you, Chair. I'll give a very brief sort of canter through, and then I'll ask Jan if there's anything she thinks is sort of important that I've missed. This is a quarterly report that I think comes to this committee, goes to Cabinet and possibly even to Audit Committee, I can't remember. But it's the first one of the year, so we've just basically, it's to the end of June, which is the end of the first quarter of the year. And I'd say probably as always, it shows a forecast overspend position. So the way this report is made up is it takes the actual spend to the end of the quarter, and then it basically takes the forecast position to the end of the year. So the numbers we're talking about are the forecast position to the end of the year, and of course from the end of June to the end of the year, there's still 9 months to address those issues. So although it shows a forecast overspend of 7.5 million, from recollection, I think it's probably a similar position in most years, and there is plenty of time to sort of deal with any sort of underlying issues and make the necessary adjustments. I'll just take you through the key sort of overspend areas. Won't be any surprise either, because they are the overspend areas in most years. And the first one is a 3.8 forecast overspend in adult services. And that you, again, won't be surprised to hear is fundamentally because of increasing demand. And this is a sort of an ever-increasing sort of upward trajectory that we as a council experience, but also every other council in the country is experiencing. And just to give you an illustration of the sorts of numbers involved, we have 261 cases where the funding packages amount to over £100,000 a year each. So it doesn't take too many people identified with these needs to add significant extra cost. We are, as a council, doing what we can to address this, and in part that's around sort of improving capacity within the county and finding sort of ways to provide services more efficiently. But it is an ongoing issue, and it is an ongoing issue that the officers are very aware of and are doing everything they can to deal with. The next area of overspend is children's services, which is basically looked after children and education, particularly in the special education needs and disabilities area, SEND. The sort of big cost there is external placements. So where the council has to pay for care for children with external providers. Sometimes that's within the county, sometimes it's out of the county, and again, it's very it can be very expensive. We are in the council trying to build more capacity quickly within the county, and had we not been doing that, that figure would have been significantly higher than £2.4 million. So it's an ongoing challenge. There is an SEND white paper expected this I think this autumn. And so it'll be interesting to see what the government ideas on how to deal with, again, a national issue, what plans they have and what ideas they can come up with, and how they plan to fund it. And then the other area where there's a forecast overspend is place and regen. Place and regen, quite a sort of broad ranging portfolio, and includes planning, it includes highways, neighbourhood services. There's a £1 million sort of expected reduction in income or reduction in saving against the forecast of around best use of assets, which is really around sort of rationalising the council's estate, using the buildings that we own in a better way. That's just a delay. That will happen, but it's just it hasn't happened yet, and there are sort of quite difficult things to deal with in terms of locations of staffs and teams working together and so on. The other areas of sort of overspend tend to be around staffing and hire of vehicles, and there's a £500,000 underachievement forecast on planning income because of a reduction in sort of planning activity even coming forward requiring planning permission. So that's a sort of summary. There's a lot of detail in the report setting out the sort of precise over and underspends. It's also important to say that as well as being overspends, there are areas that are underspending as well. So it's not all in one direction. There's been £70 million worth of capital reprofiling, and these fundamentally are major projects where we are not on target to spend the money we expected to spend this year. It's not projects being cancelled or anything, it's just things slipping into the following year. Obviously, we're all aware that there's been rising construction costs over recent years since COVID, and that's impacting us. So in some cases, it takes a bit longer because things have to be redesigned to keep them within the budget framework. In other cases, there simply aren't that many people bidding to do the work, and so it takes us longer to find somebody to do it. And also, these projects generally require planning permission and often are working with external partners. So examples of this are some of the Borderlands projects, the GIEF, which is basically the sort of planning bonanza that we're expecting from the data center at Camas. Obviously, that hasn't. I don't think we're going to get as much of that and then be able to spend it this year. So that's sort of slipping into the following year. A couple of cycling projects, one in. It's in my own ward that are being built, but they're just not as far on as it was originally anticipated when this budget was produced. And some of the recycling requirements that we're going to have to do, but we don't yet know what we're going to have to do because we're waiting on the government telling us how much money we're going to get and so on. And so that broadly speaking is the capital reprofiling. However, there has been some significant capital investment this year, and we continue to invest in the Northumberland line and in transport, which is really important for our local economy. We're probably one of the only authorities in the country that are investing fairly significant sums in education, and there's been some decent capital spend in improving the futures of our children. And we're doing the basics as well. There's £1.8 million being spent in fleet replacement, which is really important to keep the sort of local services that the householders expect on the road. There's a little bit about the borrowing summary. We're well within our operational boundaries and authorised limits. I think 59% of the operational boundary. And there's also a little bit about the BEST programme, which is really important because that sort of underpins our drive for efficiency, and we're on target for £5.5 million worth of recurrent, that's sort of annual savings this year. And that sort of in a nutshell, I think are the key points from the report. I don't know if there's anything you think important to add, Jen?
Yeah. Anything you wish to add?
Just Just one point around best. The savings targets in the MTFP for this financial year were based on the original business case. And members will be aware that we did a complete refresh of the strategic business case for best, which was finalised at the beginning of this year. It was too late to update all of the MTFP figures. So the figures, the savings targets, and crucially the profiling of those in terms of which financial year they will fall in, are based on the business case that was developed back in 2023. The refreshed business case, is much more ambitious than the original business case. It is informed by a huge amount of more detailed work that has been carried out since that original strategic business case was developed. And when we roll forward the MTFP in February next year, the intention is to incorporate those updated profiles in the budget. But that is, so Councillor Oliver referred to slippage in terms of delivering the £1 million of savings for best use of assets. So that's one example. Some of the procurement and commissioning related savings, will be greater than we originally forecast, but will take a bit longer to deliver. So there is that's another reason why we're seeing some variances in the position at the moment. But overall, best is delivering those significant efficiencies, and there is a lot more to come next year, and the following year is where we'll see the big impact of all of that work that's been done to date. And that's all I wanted to add, Chair.
Okay, thank you, John. Do you have any questions on that report?
Thank you. I've got a couple of small ones actually. First of all, the children's services, and we'll keep going back to the external provision. What sort of assurance can this committee have that this, because has there been an increase in it this year? Yeah, so what sort of assurance can we have that things are going to get better with this? Because it just doesn't seem to be from year to year. And the second one is the telecare on page 41. Every time we get this report, it seems to be that the telecare has this delay in realising the savings. Just what is the underlying problem with that one?
I can take the first question. I'm afraid I don't know very much about the telecare, and unless Jan does, we may need to get you a written response on that. But in terms of the overall sort of issue with children's, I think the first point I would make is that we do have an issue, but it's not as bad as the issue that some people elsewhere are experiencing, and the reason for that is because we've been very proactive as a council over a number of years to build extra capacity. As I mentioned, the position would have been significantly worse had we not been building extra capacity within the county. And I'm aware, and I've already had a sort of preliminary budget meeting with the Director of Children's Services, and I'm aware that there's a laser-like focus on delivering this extra capacity. The capital budgets support that, and will continue to support that. There's a sort of two fundamental aims. The first is obviously to deliver services efficiently and as cheaply as possible, but also there's a really important social aim in terms of delivering the care as close to people, the communities as possible, and not having to sort of have people in care outside the county and a long way away from their families. So you can have our assurance that it is a major priority, and we are continuing to address it. One of the things that we can't really address is the increase in demand, and that can be because of the large amounts of money involved in some of these cases. It doesn't take many extra cases for the actual figures to sort of rise quite
So we're
dramatically.
talking about extra homes being.
Yes, yes.
Do we have any sort of planned now? Any sites?
Yes, yeah, no, there are. I can't give you the detail because obviously it's not my portfolio, but we talk about it every week, just about. And there is, there are extra homes, and there are issues. So when a building is identified as a potential home, obviously there needs to be, there's a sort of statutory process that needs to be gone through. That needs to be approved by government. There needs to be a planning permission. There are often a lot of liaison with local members. Sometimes there are objections from local communities or even indeed local members, and so it's not a quick process, but we're getting them delivered as quickly as we possibly can.
I suppose what I'm getting at is if I wanted to know how many of these were in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Is that something that
I think we can get you that figure.
without specific details
Yes,
on them,
yeah,
how many is actually in the pipeline as a going concern?
Yeah,
right?
I can't give you that off the top of my head, but we can certainly get that information.
Chair, I may be able to assist with that. So in this year's budget, we built in funding to enable us to create an additional 12 spaces in county, our own in-county children's homes. And the issue is not that we haven't created those spaces. It's just the amount of time that it's taken for them to be properly registered with Ofsted, which I believe they have now been. So those spaces are now available. But the budget assumed that they would be operational from the start of the financial year, and that hasn't happened. But we have secured the additional bed spaces. The issue going forward is whether we need to now go further, having created those initial 12 spaces, looking again at the underlying demand and seeing whether we need more. But we can get you a detailed, up-to-date position from Children's Services on that.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Jan. I mean, it would be interesting to come back to this committee, I think, once those 12 spaces were up and occupied, as to what sort of effect it had on the savings.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just been on Family and Children's Services for the past 2 terms, and I've seen the reports coming through. The costs to send our looked after children outside the community, sometimes, way down the country because we haven't had spaces, have been massive. And it's much better. There are instances where for the individual, it can't be kept within the county, for their own particular reasons. But the costs have been huge, and it is much better for the child to be kept obviously within the county. There are so many knock-on costs attached to them being kept outside the county, but to keep them within the county. And just to remind members, every member is a corporate parent, and they have a responsibility for our looked after children. Each member does, but to try and keep, it's not just a cost thing, it's for the individual as well, to try and look for where we can place them in the best possible setting. Some of these properties that we're looking at to place them within the community is in a normal family type setting, in a house, in an estate, and it's the best way we can find to bring up children in a normal setting. So that's what we're looking at doing. And knock-on effect is a much reduced cost. But reports are available previously for Family and Children's Services, but as Councillor Rover said, try and get those figures forward. With regard to your second question, Jan, did you have any further information with regards to telecare or?
Chair, I do know that a piece of work is currently being done on options for the telecare service. But again, I think probably best to get a written note for the committee on that from Neil Bradley, the responsible executive director. So I'll arrange that, and that can be circulated after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? just a couple of points I want to pick up on.
Yeah.
Councillor Oliver, you briefly mentioned one, and that was with these increase in special education needs, which is not just affecting this authority, it's a national issue, which all authorities seem to struggle to keep up with because of the huge annual increases in demand and services. And as you mentioned, there is a white paper that we're looking forward to coming through to all authorities, because we're hoping that that will provide some help and support, because year after year, we're providing more financial help towards meeting those needs. And as we do, it leaps forward again, and it leaps forward again. One that I did find very interesting in here was with regards to place and regeneration, when, as you mentioned, Councillor Oliver, there was a housing and planning forecast that there'd been a 10% downturn of applications which have been held nationally, which I found quite surprising, considering back in July, the Prime Minister actually stated that there'd been an 80% increase in Northumberland. So the figures themselves seem to counteract that statement that had been made in Parliament. So,
yeah, I mean, I think the position in Northumberland is that there's a lot of planning, sort of historical planning applications being built out now, and some of those go back, 8-10 years, and then the level of applications coming forward over recent years has been broadly in line with our previous targets. And obviously the requirement on us going forward is to build to just around about 200% of what our previous target was. And then what we are determined to do as a local authority is make sure that we keep some sort of control. We can't do anything about the targets. They're going to be set by national governments. What we can do is try and influence where and what type of housing is built within the county, and make sure that we have a degree of control, and we don't sort of give up that control to the developers. And the mechanism for doing that is our local plan. So there's work has started on updating the local plan. That will allow us basically to control and try and direct the housing to the type of housing we need, and to the areas where we need it, not necessarily just sort of throwing it all open as a sort of developer's charter. So that's the direction of travel.
So we're being asked to approve the report and the reprofiling of the capital programme as 70 million from the 25-26 and the 26-27 to reflect the estimated expenditure levels in the current financial year, and to note the projected overspend on the services. There are a number of recommendations there which will take you some time to read through. And do you have recommendations? Okay, are we okay with that report then? Good. Thank you. So item 6 on the agenda is the fair funding review.
Yeah. So this is basically a copy of a document that's been submitted to MHCLG, setting out our council's response to the fair funding review. So you probably remember in the government's manifesto before they were elected, they promised to sort of reorganise local government, or reorganise the funding of local government, and there's also a bit of reorganising of local government going on as well. And this is the sort of manifestation of that. So in the first year, there were some changes to the budget. You may recall that we lost our rural services delivery grant as more money was directed towards metropolitan areas. But this is a more fundamental change than that now. This is basically the government have gone out to consultation. They're talking to all local authorities. They've made some proposals. Those proposals are being analysed and responded to, and then the government will announce, I believe, at the end of November, their plans, and that in turn will then lead to a proposed settlement just before Christmas. So I think, as Jan said last week, so once again the Christmas is cancelled for the finance department as they have to work those figures into the budgets. But there is some good news, and credit where credit's due. I think welcome the fact that we will be getting a 3-year settlement, which is good, because it allows us to plan further ahead. And our budget process has begun based on the assumptions that we've seen with the fair funding consultation. So some broad things are being consulted on. They're leading to assumptions being made, and then some analysis of what might mean in terms of our funding. And then we're taking a conservative approach to that and applying those assumptions to our budget. I won't go through the report in detail, but it's a very, I think it's a significant piece of work. There's been a lot of thought to what in most cases were pretty binary questions. And the questions were, do you agree? Yeah, we're thinking about doing this, do you agree? And often the answer cannot be a yes or no. It has to be much more nuanced than that, and there are some very complex. Some you'll see in the report. Some of the answers, yes, we agree. No, we don't agree. But in most cases, there's a lot more detail. There are. So a lot of work has gone into it, and I just hope that somebody in Whitehall actually reads it because it is really important. There are some themes. One of the themes that struck me the most is that local authorities in rural areas have higher costs, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. We've got greater geographical distances to travel, so it costs more to empty bins because the bin drivers have to go further in between the houses and things. But another sort of alarming thing that came out was the gap between rural areas and non-rural areas is increasing in terms of funding, up to £167 per head, and that's the sort of funding from local government to from sort of central government to local governments. We have increased costs because of the distances, but we've also got costs in less obvious areas. So often it's more expensive to recruit staff in rural areas because there are fewer people living there, and so therefore the staffing costs are higher. There's often higher transport costs for users of services to access the services because they don't live as close to them. A great example of that, the household waste recycling bins. North Tyneside have got one recycling centre. Newcastle have got 3, and we've got 12. So that gives you an idea of the extra costs that we're incurring of operating basically a local tip that people can access for recycling their waste. And you'll see in the table set out in the report the range of costs increases from £29 a tonne to £234 a tonne, and that's just the nature of the sparsity of the more rural areas not taking as much volume. We also have to do things like support more rural services. I remember a report seeing a couple of years ago that I think every rural bus service in the west of the county is in one way or another subsidised, and we subsidise 60 services across the county. So, and in metropolitan areas, they often don't have to do that at all. And then I think another general theme I sort of pick up out of this is that the officers in finance who have prepared this response are often worried that the government will take an oversimplified approach to dealing with things. So an example of that is how you measure deprivation. It doesn't take into account things like local access to services and the difficulties that having larger rural areas brings in that respect. So that's a sort of quick summary of the report, but it is a very detailed piece of work and quite stark in some cases.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. Jan, do you have anything that you'd like to add to this?
Just to provide a brief update on what we are expecting. I mean, the consultation has closed now, and the latest intelligence we have is that the government will be issuing a policy statement with their response in early November. We are told that will be a detailed response and should give us enough detail to update our modelling so that we've got, a pretty good feel for what the provisional settlement is likely to be. Provisional settlement then coming in the week commencing the 15th of December. We are expecting that provisional settlement to include something about how the government proposes to deal with accumulated send deficits, because this is a really big issue for a number of counties, including us, although our send deficits are nowhere near as great as some counties are seeing, so they have deficits in the hundreds of millions. There will be a separate 4-week consultation on those send proposals. We don't think this is the same as the promised send white paper, which is going to set out government proposals for reform of the wider send system. So we think this is a consultation specifically on that funding issue, and we'll have to wait and see what that consultation looks like. I think the only other thing to say is that we continue to have discussions through the county councils network and the professional associations around some of the other issues in the wider local government funding system. I think it's important to bear in mind that this fair funding review is simply about how the cake is carved up between local authorities, not the size of the cake. And and there is an urgent need for a wider reform of the local government funding system, which would include things like send, like allocations for special education needs, funding allocations, and wider reform of council tax and general revenue raising powers for local authorities. So there is a much bigger reform agenda which we continue to push for. But I think as Councillor Oliver said, one thing that is going to be helpful is whatever the outcome of this fair funding review, having a 3-year settlement will really be important for us to allow us to start to plan our finances on a medium to longer term basis, because it has felt very hand to mouth in recent years with a succession of 1-year funding settlements, and never knowing until we actually receive them, whether there are going to be significant changes. And the removal of the Rural Services Delivery Grant and also a General Services Grant are examples of that, where in recent years there have often been some nasty surprises when the provisional settlement's been announced. So we welcome that aspect, but wait to see in early November whether the government have actually read our submission and taken on board some of those issues that Councillor Oliver has highlighted. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jan. Do we have any questions? As Councillor Oliver and Jan has mentioned, hope that the government has read through this. I've read through it, and I really appreciate the amount of work and the amount of effort that have been put into this Q&A by the staff and this for the submission. Councillor Oliver there mentioned the waste. We could go on about education, transport, about winter services, supported bus services, etc., etc. It just draws the complete difference between, and it mentions in here, you've got Newcastle itself with a similar population to Northumberland, slightly less, but that's looking at 112 square kilometres for an area. Northumberland is over 5,000 square kilometres and had the rural support grant removed and other grants removed. But with having a not too dissimilar population, we have such a huge area that we have to cover. And we have to maintain all that with all the extra distance that's got to be covered, but providing those same services across the size of Northumberland. So it's not as easy as just saying, here's a straightforward formula, make it work. Everything has to go down to a much greater level of detail, and I'm really pleased that our staff are taking the time to not just supply a yes, no answer, but provide a greater amount of detail for this submission. So hopefully the government does take that into account before they make the decision. It's not just our area that's affected. There are other areas that are affected as well. So this was just to provide an update, and I hope members have taken time to read through this carefully because there's a significant amount of information in here.
Actually, just pops the name in my head there. There's obviously a big difference between something like Newcastle, small area, and that. What are the actual numbers in terms of money that they get to what we get in Northumberland? Is there a proportionate difference? Do we get more money for that, or are we really restricted? I don't know. I've never, it's just as a matter of interest, maybe, but
I can't answer on the specifics, but I think it's fair to say that generally metropolitan authorities get more per head. But I mean, they do. To be fair, they have other issues as well that we have, not less of, but generally they get more money per head. I think the report, this consultation response set out that gap is widening. I don't know whether that's specific to Newcastle or whether it's sort of a much broader picture, but
definitely an imbalance.
Generally there is an imbalance. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to item 7, which is the universal credit impact on housing tenants. We have with us today Connor Gallagher, who's the income manager, who's going to go through that report for us.
Thank you. So I was asked to bring this report following a question about the impact of migration onto our customers. So Northumberland has around 7,800 customers living in our properties at this moment in time. And just under 4,500 of those are claiming universal credit. So what I've tried to do in the report is give a brief overview of what universal credit is and how managed migration is being rolled out within Northumberland. In comparison to other authorities, universal credit in Northumberland was quite late, so we were able to learn a lot from other authorities and gain experience as to what the impacts might be and how better to support our customers within tenancy to ultimately prevent eviction and have tenancy sustainment. So I've tried to managed migration in Northumberland started in April 2023, and what you'll find from Appendix 1 is that is where the numbers significantly increased, and almost the floodgates were open for new claims, which had an impact on the numbers that we had. It is a working age benefit, and 71% of those are aged between 22 and 55, and it wouldn't be a surprise for people in the main living in flats and 2 and 3 bedroom houses, so that would be the tenant profile for you there. In relation to what we've done to manage UC, this isn't something that we've created, we've had to respond to. So in September 19, there was a restructure within housing operations. The income team was created in September. The focus has been on tenancy sustainment and helping people navigate and adhere to the tenancy agreement. But there was, particularly in the early days, there was delayed payments, administration issues that were needed to respond to. It was a very new benefit. It was challenging. It was complex for customers and ourselves while we got to grips with it as well. But what I have tried to highlight is that we are doing quite well through this. We don't do it alone within housing. We have to work with colleagues and other services. So whilst we have created a tenancy support team, we've got welfare benefit officers. Of course, we work with colleagues within council tax support. We apply for discretionary housing payments, refer customers to CAB if they've got significant debt, and I think 3 years ago created a hardship fund within housing so that if customers have fallen into arrears, never been in arrears before, they've had a crisis, we have made payments to clear arrears and support people. in this year, it has only been to universal credit customers so far, but we have only made about £8,000 worth of payments. So the allocation or the need for customers receiving hardship has reduced over time as well, because in previous years it has been higher. I've also tried to set out at what point we can apply for direct payments. So obviously under housing benefit, the landlord will receive the rent straight away. In universal credit, it doesn't work like that. We don't have a right to get the rent from day one. We have to either identify vulnerability or wait for somebody to be in 8 weeks or more worth of rent arrears. In addition to that, we don't then get the money back for the arrears. We have to work with the customer to either come up with a payment plan, or if they're in significant debt, we can apply for a third-party deduction. But the rates of which of that is repaid are minimal. The positive is, though, that performance has maintained good, and we have significantly reduced evictions, and we haven't evicted anybody as a result of somebody making a claim for universal credit. Ultimately, our job is to sustain tenancies. You will note within the report that the significant impact is prior to the 13-14 week period, and this is because customers, if they're making a new claim and it includes housing costs, they don't receive their first payment for 5 weeks. So unless they have a perfect rent account, they're obviously going to be building up arrears until they receive the first payment. Sometimes the customers don't realise that the rent's included within the universal credit payment. They may spend it, they may have these are other reasons that they've only paid part of the rent or whatever. So what we find is we have a significant peak in arrears, and over a gradual period of time it then starts to reduce. So I've tried to highlight within the table the difference between the first claim and when somebody's been on over a year. We know that we can't stand still, and we know that we have to continually support our customers, and we are within housing being more heavily regulated. So what we are trying to do is contact every customer and get behind the door of every customer to get to know them. And hopefully this will give us more learning as to what the service needs to look like going forward in order to respond not just to universal credit. Quite often, sometimes people with very little money can actually budget very, very well. There'll be wider issues within the household that they need support with. And us being able to get through the door, check the property condition, see if there's any other support that they might need. That will take a couple of years for us to do for all of those properties to be contacted. And we're also going through consultation and rewriting our tenancy agreement. And we're going to be asking customer opinion on whether we should abolish the non-collection weeks or not, which is what other authorities have done in light of helping people manage the transition through to universal credit, because that's paid over 52 weeks of the year, whereas rent's collected over 49 weeks of the year. So that, Chair, was it.
Yeah, thank you, Don. Answer all of that. Have you got anything that you would like to add to that?
No, I'm going to take it. Sorry.
Jan, have you got anything that you'd like to add to that report?
Just to say, Chair, that in addition to rent arrears, many universal credit claimants also have council tax arrears. So we need to recognise that if we're providing assistance to households that are experiencing financial difficulty, we need to look at that in the round and not just look at rent arrears in isolation.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Donna, we've got Jill O'Neill, who's leading on a number of funds. Did you make mention of that? We've got Household Systems Fund, other funding.
So the household support fund, do you mean the household support fund?
Yes.
Or the hardship fund?
Well, available.
So we can apply through Jill's team for things like utility vouchers or white goods. So if somebody's going into tenancy and they don't have anything, we can apply to that fund. We also have the HRA's hardship fund, which is within housing that we can, if somebody's engaged and they've had a crisis and arrears have built up, we can make automatic payments to the rent account. That fund has reduced, but so has the appetite for people applying to that fund as well. So I could see that as a positive.
Just want to highlight the fact that there's other help available. Do you have any questions on that report? Councillor Dunn.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to congratulate Donna on the work that the team does, because I think sustaining the tenancies is really of vital importance. It was a really simple question. Donna, how many are in your team?
I have 10 income officers, I have 3 tenancy support officers, 2.5 welfare benefit officers, and a senior income officer, and myself.
Okay. And just on a general thing, how difficult do people find actually completing the application form because of internet access? I'm asking this because I actually helped somebody with a form with an application the other week on a phone, and it was virtually like it was impossible. So people who have only got a mobile phone to do this on, are they finding this really difficult?
So I know that Citizens Advice have dedicated teams where people can go to if they are digitally excluded or they need help and support with that. The point where our team gets involved is we're either verifying the rent or confirming with the DWP that they've already done the claim. We do help people complete council tax support forms when we're in properties online, but I don't hear from the team, if I'm being honest, and I don't know if that is because of the high proportion of, it's aged between 25 and the younger people who they've got smartphones, they've got tablets or whatever, or they go to family and friends for help and assistance, so it's not really coming back.
Okay.
Councillor, did you just want to?
Yeah, I just on the point about connectivity. I mean, obviously there are different reasons that people can't connect. Some people may not be able to afford a phone. Other people may not have access to a signal or broadband. If for the latter two reasons, a signal or broadband, we are determined to try and sort of fill those not spots where people can't get actual access, and we've got a connectivity. Sorry, yeah. Well, come along to our connectivity summit on the 15th of October, and we'll talk specifically about your area. But that's what we're trying to do. We want to identify the areas where we have problems and then work with the suppliers, whether it be Openreach on broadband or EE or whatever on telecoms, to try and address those problems. So it really is a quite a big priority for us.
So, Joe.
Thank you. I think my question really is, I mean, you've obviously said about all the things you're putting in place. Universal credit, when it was first introduced, it caused a lot of problems. And I think all I want is reassurance that that you get in there early, that people don't build up arrears, and that we don't risk any people losing their homes. If you've got all that in place, I'm fine, but I just really need to know that you will be quite proactive on that.
We are, and when somebody makes a claim for universal credit and they put us down as a landlord, we have to confirm the rent back to the DWP to make sure there's no differences as to what somebody's saying that the rent is. At that point, it triggers within our automated processes a flag for one of our staff to contact that customer. Do you understand universal credit? Do you need any help and support? Do you want help finding a job? Can we refer you to other services? So as soon as within a week, we're contacting somebody, so I can give you that issue.
And that will happen even when you've got this migration, so a large number.
Yeah, because we still have to confirm the rent, so we still have the ability to be able to we know who the customers are.
I think that's really good that as soon as you get that trigger, we've got things in place to reach out to our residents to provide as much support as we can. Any more questions?
Yeah, may I come in? Just to make another point. We do have a low income family tracker which we use to identify those households who may be struggling with debts of various kinds, and to make sure that we have targeted interventions at an early point with those households. That is part of the work that we're taking forward under the community's first best work stream. That work is being led by Jill O'Neill and her team, and we are already seeing some success. So we had an uptake campaign for pensioner credit last year, which saw significant numbers of people being access those benefits that they're entitled to. And we're also investing in more community capacity to provide early help and intervention with people who are at risk of falling into serious debt. So you know, there is a lot of work which is going on to ensure that those interventions are happening at an early stage, rather than waiting for people to fall into significant debt that they then struggle to escape from. So I just wanted to make that point.
That's great. Good point. Well made there, Jack.
Yeah. On page 99 of the report, Donna, it's got the table for evictions, and the little asterisk there says two tenancies reinstated post eviction. I'm just, what is the background to where you get to that point where somebody's evicted and then reinstated?
So I've actually got first-hand experience with one of them, although I signed off on both of them being reinstated. So if I can give the circumstances, if that's all right, Chair.
It doesn't go in.
Yeah, so
I don't want personal things. I just wonder why you have to get to the point of eviction and then fall back again.
So one of them was a family who owed £6,000, just over £6,000 plus court costs. The couple, one person in the couple wasn't aware of the arrears, and it wasn't until the bailiffs went out, changed the locks, did the husband then ring in to find out what was going on. So I did a home visit with one of the income officers, 8 o'clock at night. They arranged part payment of the arrears, and on condition they engaged, I signed them back up. I would rather do that than have that family go through homeless and cost the authority more money. Actually, that's a brilliant news story, because their account is exactly where it needs to be, and within 6 months, all of the debt was gone. It was just somebody who wasn't able to manage money and hadn't shared that. Should just Sarah.
Thank you.
That's a bit.
Thanks. Just leading on for that. I probably should know it, but if you do evict person, a couple, whatever, family from a tenancy, what is then the council's responsibility to house them?
Don't work on homelessness, so if I'm being very vague, forgive us, but it would be very much dependent on whether the family was classed as being in priority need. So if it was a single person, because they'd been evicted, they would be likely to be excluded from home finder because of rent arrears until the rent arrears had gone. If it was a family, they would have to present to homeless, but they would be classed as making themselves intentionally homeless. One thing that I would say is the eviction. So say last year as an example of 12 evictions, none of those evictions would have did make a family homeless. I was saying to the chair earlier, they were as a result of legally bringing the tenancy to an end. So, for example, somebody's flit or they've abandoned the property, but they were in rent arrears, so we've used that process to bring the tenancy to an end quicker than other ways of doing so.
That's true.
But there will always be help and support for folk who are homeless, and you know, it wouldn't be social housing.
So by doing this, you're actually keeping people in housing, and it's probably saving the council money as well.
Yeah, I think within the report I put a table where there's 8 tenancies, and I think the value was something just under 50,000. I think through this and through the income team, the balances are generally higher if the people in trouble, and that's where the intensive tenancy support comes in, that rather than the cost of an eviction. I think is around £24,000, be it the impact to adults, be it the impact to voids, trying to get somebody. Sometimes it's better to carry the debt rather than evict.
Sure.
Coming through this, it's shown, we have, as you said a few years ago, we reacted and we set that team up to try and help where we could. And as been pointed out through the questions, that has worked as best as we can so far. But from all of this, I think one of the main points is people need to ask if they haven't, difficulties, reach out and ask. There are methods, there are processes and procedures out there where the council can offer help, can offer guidance, support, and try and see through some difficult times to try and correct this. And if just don't sit there and struggle and, as you said, bury your head in the sand, because we will always try and help wherever we can to maintain that tenancy and keep people in a home. But it has to be a two-way street. We just need people to work with us. Right, thank you for that, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Are you happy for me to be excused, Chair?
Thank
Thank you.
Item 8 is the work programme and monitoring report. Sure.
Yeah, November already for the next meeting. So we've got the regeneration update, annual workforce report. There are two fairly meaty reports in themselves. What the work programme doesn't even reflect is the consultation process, which normally sort of starts on sort of November. Definitely getting reports in February. And basically going down to the work programme, something on the forward plan share. But having said that, you will be able to see November and February if there are any issues that you want me to look into. Yeah, do that on behalf.
Thank you. Item 9, I have no items of urgent business. That, I'm going to close the meeting. Thank you for your input today. Thank you for your attendance.